to the Wine Program. This is my channel and podcast about what every waiter, waitress, line cook, and restaurant manager needs to know about the subject of wine. Now, by now I'm sure you all know about this category or heard about this category of wine called natural wine, aka natty wine, natty juice, stanky dank. Okay, it's been called a number of things recently. And although it's become kind of a buzzword, right, natural wine, or a trend, the movement has actually been around since the 1950s. During this explosion of chemical fertilizers and pesticides in winemaking, there was this guy, his name was Jules Chauvet, and he was a winemaker in Beaujolais, France, and he was becoming alarmed by like the industrialization of grape farming and winemaking, and he was one of the first guys to start talking about this concept of natural wine, right? So he began promoting a return to traditional winemaking, starting with old vine, never spraying with synthetic herbicides or pesticides, meticulous viticulture, low yields, minimal sulfur, and no chaptalization. Now, Chauvet had a disciple in Beaujolais, and this guy's name was Marcel Lapierre, and he hooked up with Guy Berton and Jean-Paul Thévenet and Jean Foillard, and they became like this gang of four. The things that the gang of four were advocating for were just simply good winemaking practices. Low yields, old vines, minimal additions, minimal sulfites, meticulous vineyard work, right? To me, that just sounds like great winemaking. Now, there are people who make great wine who don't necessarily call themselves natural winemakers. Chateau Moussard, Auguste Clap, Emilio Pepe, you know, these are natural wines, but they're not saying like, hey, I'm a natural winemaker, right? This guy says he's a natural winemaker. That's cool. Now, over the past few years, this idea of natural wine has become like a real movement in the wine industry. But the natural wine movement has also become a little bit controversial. Why? There's never been any real regulating body or official rules to what natural wine really is. So now any winemaker who rolls their own cigarettes and wears a funny hat and purchases grapes on the internet and doesn't know how they were grown and brings the grapes to his or her garage and makes wine out of it can say, yeah, it's natural. So it not only becomes unfair to the consumer who thinks that they're buying a quote-unquote natural wine, it's also not fair to, other quote-unquote natural winemakers who are really adhering to these strict policies. So no one's holding them accountable. That's the point, right? But there is good news on the way. There seems to be some strong effort by the French Wine Authority to clarify the category of natural wine, right? So I want to refer you to this article published in Forbes magazine. There's a new natural wine designation in France, is the headline, by Jill Barth. So in order to claim this kind of bitchin' logo, the winemaker must submit each wine for analysis after bottling. Spot checks will also require documentation and cellar notes that support natural wine practices, and after verification and the payment of a $20, I think it's 20 euro fee, frankly, the label may be applied starting with the 2019 vintage. So quickly, let's have a look at some of these new French rules, okay, in order to get this certification. Number one, the wine has to be produced from organic grapes. So they don't go as far as saying biodynamic, but they don't kind of let you off easy and just say, well, it's sustainable. The grapes need to be hand-picked, okay, so only hand-harvested, no machine, no mechanical. The wines need to be made exclusively with indigenous yeast, right? So we talked about that a lot, especially in the terroir episode, which if you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to link to it here, because especially when yeast comes into play, this is really important. And the wine must be bottled unfined and unfiltered. Also, they give a list of prohibited techniques that are thought of as like too brutal or too punishing for wine. Thermovinification is something that's done before fermentation, where you heat up the grapes to help extraction of phenolic compounds from grape skins. It's used in the grape juice industry and sometimes in mass wine production. Reverse osmosis is next, and that's basically a microfiltration process, and it's used as a way winemakers can reduce the alcohol content of the wine without changing the flavors of the wine. Flash pasteurization is next, and this is a process that eliminates bacteria and microorganisms. Now, other than those, there's a whole bunch of additives that can be put in wine. In fact, I found a list of like 200. Now, I don't know which are banned or which are not, or if they're all banned, but I do have to mention, like, there's a lot of weird stuff that's added to wine. Potassium sorbate, and that could be used as a protector in the winemaking process to kill bacteria and prevent yeast from spoiling it. Calcium carbonate is commonly used to reduce the acidity of wine. It's not unusual for calcium carbonate to be added when the grapes are having trouble ripening. Sugar, That's also known as chaptalization. We know this already. Grape juice concentrates also may not be added. Things like mega purple or ultra red are really just types of a thick concentrate, and these make the color of the red wine more intense while adding a bit of extra sugar to smooth out the mouthfeel and make the wine taste like more velvet. Now finally, at the end of this list is sulfites added at bottling. Now, this new natural wine designation is going to have two separate labels. One that is bottled with minimal sulfites and one that is bottled with no sulfites at all. Now, I want to read you something from the Cojito Wine website, okay? They import natural wines into Singapore from Europe. They say, the biggest misconception about natural wine revolves around the use of sulfur dioxide. At Cojito, we choose wines without quote-unquote added sulfites, or from producers using a homeopathic dose. To me, I think homeopathic dose is just fancy speak for a tiny little bit. This is prudent given Singapore is a long distance from wineries and transportation with possible temperature changes. So what they're saying is, if you're going to be shipping a wine from Loire Valley or Beaujolais or the south of France where this wine is made, and you've got to send it all the way to Singapore, guess what? You might have to use a little bit of sulfites, okay? Otherwise, your wine is going to spoil. And when it gets to Singapore, they're going to send it back to you. Now, I just want to show you a label. This is from a Kermit Lynch import. Kermit Lynch is a legendary importer. Kermit Lynch is actually the first guy to import these wines from the Gang of Four. In fact, he's credited with coming up with that term, Gang of Four. Now, this is a case of La Pierre's wine from Beaujolais. It says this on the sticker. Important, Cuvée Nature, this wine bottles unfiltered and without added sulfur dioxide, must be stored in conditions where temperatures do not exceed 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Failure to comply will put the wine at risk of alteration. So if Kermit Lynch is importing La Pierre from Beaujolais to New York City, and then it's going to be put on a truck and it's going to be driven all the way down to Florida or whatever the case may be, it's got to be kept at 57 degrees Fahrenheit the entire time. And then when it gets to the wine store or the restaurant, it's got to be refrigerated immediately. And if you put it in a retail shop and some guy buys it and puts it in the trunk of his car and drives it home, what's going to happen? Again, I'm not saying that, you know, sulfites are the devil, and I'm not saying that they're the savior, but I'm just saying, like, there's pros and cons on both sides, okay? Some people think that sulfur is gonna, you know, damage the natural character of the wine. Some people think that they would rather have a little bit of sulfur and get the wine home and be able to enjoy it. Me, personally, I've had some natural wines that I purchased from the natural wine store, and guess what? A couple were a little bit too stinky for me, a couple of them were really good. And across the board, they're not cheap, okay? Because you're paying for that trend, you're paying for the expensive viticulture. In some cases, you're buying it from these like little, you know, boutique wine shops that have a high markup. They need to stay in business, and I can totally appreciate that also. What's most important to me is that the wine tastes like it's from some place. So if you're doing so much manipulation to your Pinot Noir from Sonoma that it tastes like Shiraz from Australia, then you did too much to it. You know what I mean? With that, I wanted to give it a whirl and check out a bottle with you guys. This is Remy Pujol's La Tempe Faith Rouge, and it came highly recommended by some very nice fellows over at Diversey Wine in Chicago. And when I called Diversey Wine, I said, you know, I want just the quintessential natural wine you offer for around 20 bucks, and they sold me this wine. So I decanted it about a half hour ago. Come back for the next episode, and I'm going to do my first official review of an apparently natural wine, okay? So please like, share, and subscribe to the wine program, and remember, it's not what you know, it's what you need to know. Adios and peace, guys, okay? I'll talk to you soon. Adios. Cheers.